It's really something how language evolves, isn't it? And how certain words just suddenly seem to be everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today we're going to dig into two of those. Political correctness, or PC, which, was huge back in the mid-90s.
Great. I remember that.
And then its more recent version, wokeness. It feels maybe like a totally new thing, but when you look closer.
You see the echoes.
Yeah.
Definitely. We've got some really interesting sources lined up to explore this.
What have we got?
Well, there's an article from In These Times. It's looking back at PC history and critiques,
Yeah.
but from a leftist angle.
Okay.
Then Dalhousie University has an analysis comparing PC and wokeness, trying to sort of pin down the differences and similarities.
Mm-hmm.
We also listened to a podcast episode, Absolutely Intercultural, which had some really diverse takes on how PC plays out across cultures.
Oh, interesting.
And finally, a piece from Hotter Education magazines. It's more sociological, asking if this whole PC and wokeness thing might actually be, a modern moral panic.
A moral panic. Okay. So our mission today, then, is to really try and get under the skin of these terms.
Exactly.
Understand how we got from PC to wokeness, the big worries are.
And whether those worries are about, like, a genuine threat to how we talk to each other, or if it's more of an overblown reaction. This moral panic idea.
Right. Okay, let's jump in. Back to the 1990s, political correctness.
Yeah, and what's maybe surprising is that some of the really sharp critiques of PC back then, they actually came from within the left.
Like who?
Like Barbara Epstein. In '92, she wrote about this concern that the fear of saying the wrong thing, even inside progressive circles, could end up, well, backfiring.
How so?
Her worry was it was creating this kind of superficial morality, where people focus more on sounding right than on actually tackling the tough political stuff.
Focusing on appearance over substance.
Exactly. And you do have to wonder if we see maybe shades of that today sometimes.
It's also pretty striking how much media attention PC got back then. I mean, huge coverage.
Oh, massive. You had New York Magazine, The New Republic did whole issues on it. The Atlantic, big names were weighing into, John Searle, C. Van Woodward.
And the focus seemed to be heavily on universities, right?
Very much so. Issues like affirmative action, multiculturalism, feminism, gay rights, that was the battleground, seemingly.
And there was that conference, Berkeley, wasn't it?
Right, the Western Humanities Conference at UC Berkeley in 1990. It was organized by folks pushing for multicultural and feminist viewpoints.
But the reporting was different.
Yeah, Richard Bernstein in the New York Times kind of framed it as these former radicals, now professors, admitting that the universities had become, well, dominated by a new left-wing orthodoxy.
Ah, okay. And that presumably fed right into the critiques from conservatives and classical liberals.
Precisely. That narrative really took hold, this idea of, growing intolerance on campus, debate shutting down.
Pressure to conform.
Huge pressure. Conform to this radical agenda or risk getting slapped with labels like sexist, racist, homophobic.
There was that quote you mentioned.
Leon Botstein, yeah. Talking about the polarization and the death of civil discourse. It really captured the mood for some people.
But in these times, peace pushes back on that a bit, doesn't it?
It does. It emphasizes that from a leftist perspective, the term political correctness itself wasn't really something they used internally, except maybe jokingly.
So they saw it as an attack from the right.
Largely, yes. The bigger worry within those circles, according to this article, was actually this phenomenon of self-intimidation.
Self-intimidation, meaning?
Meaning people becoming afraid to speak freely, even among themselves, for fear of causing offense or being seen as insensitive.
Ah, so a chilling effect, but self-imposed.
Exactly. Afraid to voice doubts, critiques, even about their own movements or about analyzing historical movements critically.
The article mentions specific examples, right? Like discussing certain books.
Yeah, difficulties talking about, say, Claiborne Carson's book on SNCC or Alice Eccles' work on radical feminism, books that offered critical takes.
Because people were afraid of appearing critical of marginalized groups or past struggles.
That seems to be the implication. It makes you think, doesn't it? How might that self-censorship have shaped how we understand those histories now?
And it wasn't just academic theory, it impacted organizing too.
Apparently so. The piece talks about anti-war groups struggling to discuss the Israel-Palestine conflict openly.
Why? Fear of being called anti-Semitic.
That was the specific example given. It shows how this dynamic could, really get in the way of building coalitions and having necessary, if difficult, conversations.
The article draws some historical parallels, doesn't it, to things like correct lineism.
It does, yeah. Like the rigid ideology in the old Communist Party or the intense infighting in radical groups in the late 60s.
But it also says there's a difference.
A key difference. That older stuff was often about a humorless, single-minded focus on results. More strategic, maybe.
Whereas PC was.
More driven by moral than strategic thinking, and crucially, a really intense focus on language.
Why the focus on language?
Well, the article speculates it might link to the left having less direct political power in the 80s and 90s. Maybe a turn towards controlling the narrative, the discourse.
Interesting theory.
And it also points to the complexities of identity politics. When politics is heavily based on identity, and identities are multiple, fluid, fragile even.
It gets complicated fast.
Very. Which leads to this idea that the language of PC becomes saturated in guilt.
Guilt? Why guilt?
Because in that framework, nearly everyone holds some form of privilege relative to someone else, making them potentially vulnerable to criticism or accusation. It paints a picture of a movement grappling with its own internal anxieties.
Okay, that gives us a good sense of the PC era. So let's fast forward. Wokeness.
Right. The Dalhousie University analysis calls it today's equivalent of PC, basically. And the core issues seem pretty similar, even if the word is different.
What's the key characteristic of wokeness, according to them?
They talk about woke interventions. These are attempts to change things, practices, names, language.
Like renaming a building.
Right.
Or changing everyday language.
Exactly. Could be big or small. Think about, say, a controversial school mascot. The woke intervention is the push to change it.
And these interventions often stir up debate.
Definitely. The Dalhousie piece uses this anecdote about a student directing a Holocaust play. Someone used Jew as a slur.
Oh, wow.
And the person who said it just brushed it off. Said, that's just how we talk where I'm from. Didn't see the problem.
So defensiveness is a common reaction.
It seems so. When established ways of talking or doing things are challenged, people can get protective.
Okay, so what are the underlying claims behind these woke interventions? The Dal analysis breaks it down, really.
Yeah, to three things, basically. Okay. First, the idea that the practice, whatever it is offensive to a group.
Okay, claim one, it's offensive.
Second, that it implies something false or inaccurate about that group.
Claim two, it's based on a falsehood.
And third, that it ends up endorsing unfair attitudes that can lead to actual discrimination.
Claim three, it promotes injustice. Got it.
And the crucial point they make is that whether something actually does all that, it's often an open question.
Not always clear-cut.
Exactly. It takes effort, they say. Critical self-examination, honest conversations.
So just yelling, that's woke, isn't helpful.
Well, according to this view, no. It can be a way to just, shut down the conversation. Avoid thinking about whether maybe harm is being done. Protecting ignorance, basically.
Let's bring in those other perspectives from the Absolutely Intercultural podcast. They had different feelings about it.
Right. Faisal, who's Iraqi studying in Germany, he talked about feeling this filter.
The filter.
Yeah, like he had to constantly watch his words in Europe because of PC or woke language. A sense of constraint.
Okay. And then there was Waqar.
Yes. From Pakistan, running a plastic-free shop in Germany. For him, PC wasn't just words. It was about, taking real responsibility, taking action.
Like his shop, environmental action as PC.
Kind of, yeah. He saw it as translating awareness into doing something tangible, aligning actions with values, not just talk.
Interesting take. And Nicholas?
He was German, and he had a more situational view. More careful with language at work, say, than with his close friends.
The context matters.
Yeah, he even mentioned how sometimes politically incorrect humor within a close group could actually be a bonding thing, which adds another layer, doesn't it?
It really does. So the podcast left listeners with that core question.
Does this language actually reduce discrimination and bring equality? Or does it just feel like censorship? The different voices really show there's no single answer people agree on.
Okay, so we've got the history, the evolution, some personal takes. Now, this idea of a moral panic, let's unpack that.
Right, the sociological view from the Hodder education source, it basically asks, is all this intense concern about PC and wokeness actually an overreaction?
A societal freakout, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Fueled by media, politicians, maybe blowing the actual threat out of proportion.
And this view challenges the idea that free speech is under massive attack, or that young people are all fragile snowflakes.
Exactly. It points out how negative those terms PC and woke have become. They're used as insults now, right? Contrasted with common sense.
Like in those headlines mentioned.
Yeah, the Daily Star, the Independent. Ridicule. And this panic, the argument goes, can be used to distract from other problems or even roll back progress while claiming to defend free speech.
The article mentions politicians using this too.
Oh yeah, Oliver Dowden's speech is cited, criticizing woke ideology for weakening the West.
And dismissing things like pronoun usage or decolonizing maths.
Right. It shows how that anti-PC, anti-woke stance gets used politically to push back against social justice movements.
Part of the problem, the article suggests, is that nobody really agrees on what PC or woke even means.
Precisely. The vagueness helps. It lets people use the terms to create this idea of an other who's suppressing inconvenient truths. Like that book title, Wake Up, The World's Gone Nuts.
And the core idea being pushed by critics, framed within this moral panic idea, is what exactly?
It's this belief that free speech is genuinely in danger and that younger generations, Generation Snowflake, are just too easily offended.
Hence things like the Free Speech Union being set up.
Exactly. That's presented as evidence of the concern.
And cancel culture fits into this how?
It's seen as the big, scary consequence. People getting attacked online, maybe losing jobs for saying the wrong thing, deviating from supposedly fashionable, usually left-wing views.
There's a pattern described, right?
Yeah. The calling out online, the Twitter storm, media picks it up, authorities cave in. That's the narrative.
So the Hodder article applies a sociological framework good in Ben Yehuda's Features of a Moral Panic. Let's quickly run through them for PC wokeness first.
First is concern. And yes, the article says survey data does show public concern about free speech threats and people being easily offended, so check.
Okay, second.
Hostility. Think of that Nadine Dorries tweet about left-wing snowflakes. Clear hostility there. Though the article does question if it's quite as intense as hostility towards some historical folk devils.
Fair enough. Third feature.
Consensus. And here the article sees strong evidence. Lots of agreement in media and politics that PC wokeness is a serious problem.
Leading to actual policy.
Yeah. Laws to protect monuments, boost free speech on campus. So a pretty strong consensus visible there.
Okay, fourth. This seems key.
Disproportionality. And this is where the argument really bites. The article claims the level of worry about free speech being crushed is massively inflated.
Based on?
So it's a BBC reality check, a parliamentary investigation. Both apparently found little evidence of widespread suppression. So the reaction is disproportionate to the reality, they argue.
And the fifth feature?
Volatility. Moral panics tend to flare up and sometimes shift focus. While PC concerns aren't brand new, the article suggests the specific focus now, especially on snowflakes, as the new villains, shows this volatility.
So putting it all together, the conclusion is
that the whole situation around PC and wokeness shows definite signs of being a new moral panic.
What about cancel culture specifically? Is it really as widespread or damaging as claimed?
The article argues, well, first, it's not entirely new. Public shaming has happened before. Social media just amplifies it.
Okay.
Second, being canceled online doesn't always mean you're actually silenced. Sometimes it gives people a bigger platform.
Right.
And third, actual job losses seem relatively rare, despite the high-profile cases. Also, and this is important, it's not just a left-wing thing.
Example.
Corrine Fowler and the National Trust. They did a report on colonial links of properties and faced a huge backlash. Calls for defunding. That looked a lot like a canceling attempt from the right or center.
So the argument is that these accusations of wokeness aimed at snowflakes can be a tool.
A tool to discredit people, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially those involved in movements like #MeToo or Black Lives Matter.
Like the Tory chair opposing trans rights or decolonizing education mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Framing those social justice goals as just dangerous wokeness. It becomes part of the culture war battlefield.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground there. From the 90s PC debates, the shift to wokeness, different personal reactions, and this whole idea of a potential moral panic.
Yeah, and the real tension seems to be between, on one hand, this genuine important push for a fairer, more just society.
Now, on the other hand, the potential for language to become really rigid, maybe even censorious, plus the possibility that the backlash itself is being manufactured or exaggerated.
It's complicated. There's the desire to be sensitive and inclusive, but also the fear of shutting down vital conversations or being unfairly attacked.
Which leaves a big question for you, the listener, to mull over.
Right. When you hear these debates about political correctness or wokeness, how much do you think reflects real, valid worries about how we communicate and live together as society changes?
And how much might it be, well, a strategic way to push back against social justice efforts, or maybe just avoid some uncomfortable self-reflection about our own biases and privileges?
It's definitely something to think about your own experiences, your own reactions to these evolving ways we talk about the world and each other.